name is Mark Necessary. I came to Alaska in 1969. You asked why they selected me? That's a good question. Who would bring a 33-year-old up here? But I think I'd worked for a company in Corpus Christi, Texas, and I was running a small refinery. And being young, I thought I wanted something different, so I went to what you call a headhunter again, looking for jobs. And I'd been offered a job in Kuwait. I've been 33 years old and been married probably 6-7 years. I couldn't take my wife with me. She would have to live in Athens. And they said, well, we'll fly you to Athens once a month. I said, no. Then I had a call from Tesoro. The fellow's name was John Tagliarino. And he says, we would like to talk to you. So I drove up to San Antonio and interviewed with John Tagliarino. And he said, would you be interested in a superintendent job? And I said, what? Probably would. I said, we need to talk. And he said, well, it's in Alaska. I said, no, we need to talk to someone else before we get that far. We need to talk to Anita. Needless to say, I visited with Anita, and she said, it doesn't matter, honey. Anywhere you want to go, says that's good for me. So that was in 1968. And so I didn't come to Alaska. They flew Anita and I to Alaska to just see, to look at it. And where the refinery's at now was nothing but woods. And what they had purchased the land, they purchased a little over 70 acres from a fellow by the name of Robin Hood. I always wondered about that. But it's a typical, it had a log cabin on it. And we started clearing the land in the fall of 1968. Built a little warehouse. But the overall construction didn't start until the spring of 1969. And that's when we moved up to Alaska. We built, the original agreement was purchasing the royalty oil from the state of Alaska. In Alaska, I believe it's 12% of the oil production on state land goes to the state of Alaska. And to that point, the state has been selling the oil back to the producers. And Tesoro made an agreement. And I might say the original agreement was with Alaska Oil and Refining Company. And we reached an agreement. I think it was a 17,000 barrels a day oil production. And we started the construction, the original construction, in the spring of 1969. We had, most of the people were local craftsmen that did a heck of a good job. The refinery is built by union laborers, but the refinery never had a picket line. We was always proud of that. Not that we didn't have disagreements, but we was always able to work it out. And many of the people lived on the North Road. I think about the Jorgensen's and the different people that but their kids are still here. And many of their kids are still working at the refinery. Kenai was just did not have a signal light in it, or a stoplight. I don't even know if it had a stop sign. The main street was a 2-lane street. The paved road ended at Wildwood. They paved the road out to Nikiski, I believe in 1970 or 71 is when they paved the road. There wasn't many houses available. There's a lot of mobile homes at that time because Swanson River, it had been developed, and I think they discovered that in 1957. Then the production in the inlet, and there just wasn't that many homes. And we purchased a home in Kenai. Glenn Jackson was the manager, and I was the superintendent. When I originally came up, I was responsible I was the go-between the contractor, which was Litwin Corporation, and Alaska Refining. I was the go-between them. What wasn't trucked in was brought in by barge. And the big towers and the bigger equipment was brought in by barge. And where the KPL dock and that area there, we pull the barge up at high tide, we put it up on the beach. And when the tide went out, we unloaded the equipment, and we have pictures of the barge and the towers and brought it in that way. And to get the equipment, we would ship it by rail. The big equipment that came from the lower 48, it was by rail to Seattle, then the barge and up to Alaska.
Now, what did the original facility consist of?
One unit, one what's known as a crude unit, which produced mainly jet fuel. That was during the war in Vietnam, and Anchorage was very busy. So we had jet fuel contracts and diesel fuel. The gasoline we produced, we shipped the blend components to Alaska, and we blended it. But that was after the refinery started up. Originally, we had 15 employees, and except Glenn and I, all of the employees were Alaskan. We had one fellow from Prince William Sound, was a native, Andy Solenoff. And we had another fellow that's an Alaska native from southeast Alaska. And the rest of them were Caucasians, primarily from this area. Needless to say, the petroleum industry was new to Alaska. And so the people had to be trained, but they did a good job and were successful. We built the refinery, one thing, and it was the first project of that size that was built in one season. It was built the original crude unit started up in November 15th, 1969. We shipped the first product went out in January 1970. It went to the military. We shipped it by barge to Whittier. And at that time, the military had a pipeline from Whittier to Anchorage. and then it was shipped by pipeline from Whittier up to the military. We built in 1975, we built a pipeline from Kenai or Nikiski to Anchorage. Originally, when we built the refinery, we also built a terminal in Anchorage for tankage. And in later years, in 1973, we built a terminal in Valdez for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, primarily. We had several governors. In fact, I have a picture of Governor Sheffield was one of the governors. We had Governor Bill Egan. He was one of the governors. Standard Oil built a refinery in the early 60s, I think 62. That refinery was there before we built. I have a picture, I don't think in here, of Bill Egan on a backhoe. He's a typical politician, but he was, we took his picture operating a backhoe. Of course, Alaska was small enough, everyone knew everyone. And the other person that was a lot of help was Senator Stevens. In fact, his daughter still lives out north. Yeah, Sue Kovich, you may know Sue. And I think in the early 70s, Congressman Don Young, he was, we were in the process of selling the refinery to get people excited about it. And then the summer of '69, we had a model of what the refinery would look like. And we took it to Fairbanks, to Alaska land. And I'll never forget, we was in Fairbanks, July the 20th or so. First man walked on the moon. I remember a couple of moose that were killed at the back of the refinery. And needless to say, Glenn said, well, we won't be shooting any more moose at the refinery. But, and I can, when they shot a moose over right out of, I don't remember what the little lake is. It's across from Salamanca. And the fellows took a backhoe over and picked the moose up. You'd never do that today. There was hardships. I can remember at the original, we shipped everything by barge. And everything, I've seen barges floating up and down the inlet with the ice floes, not being able to get into Anchorage. And originally, one of our customers, that was before when the Japanese could fish within 12 miles of and we had Japanese ships fueling at the refinery. Original contract for a heavy oil, there wasn't a market for it in Alaska, and we shipped it to Japan. At that time, we ran Cook Inlet crude, which is probably the best crude in the world. It's known as sweet crude. It's not sour. And probably out of that, 70% of it stayed in the state. The rest of it was shipped out of state. In the early 70s, we built the unit that produced the gasoline. It's known as a reformer unit. We built it in 1975. But before that, we would ship the blend stock in and blend the gasoline here and ship it to our station. So it's sometime in the, probably 72, 73, we started building service station. When we built the pipeline in 75, at the same time, we built the unit producing the gasoline. The pipeline was separate. and the selling the product. All of this was the different divisions of the Tesoro operation.
And Mark, what was Land and Marine? Tesoro Land and Marine.
That was a service company that serviced the platforms in the inlet. They were strictly for the production side, or drilling side of the. Yeah, I'd forgotten about Land and Marine. It was a company associated with Tesoro. You see the pipe along the road that's stacked up for the drilling. That was part of the. Tesoro had a small company. Andy Silanoff, I've mentioned before, the native fella. There's a story I remember about him, that when we started the refinery up in January, it was cold, and here's all these, we're talking to these operators, and they're all cold and shivering, but here's this native fella doing kind of jogging in place. And then it dawned on me, here's this fella, he knows how to stay warm. And the Caucasians were just standing there freezing. Per a personal phone, it was 6 months before I ever got a phone. So I communicate with the refinery with a radio, and I'm sure my wife Anita could tell you some stories about the middle of the night, someone calling. You had to know Anita. She's beautiful. I always said I married up. Yeah, we were married 61 years. A lot of good memories there. I remember when we was looking at Kenai, they predicted Kenai would be 40,000 in 10 years. You can see how the Chamber of Commerce overshot that one. Some of the people that objected to the refinery said it won't be here 5 years. So I think maybe we passed that, yeah. And there were some people that objected to the refinery being built. We did our best to try to convince them that we were here to stay. We were serious. In fact, one of our first jobbers was a fellow by the name of Jim Dole, at Dole Fuel Service. And we needed someone to haul our products and distribute them. And I'll never forget meeting with Jim. He worked for Texaco, and we told him what we planned to do. And he said, "Well, I'll need to think about it." So a week or two later, I went back and talked to him, and he said, he says, there's people in the community who don't think that refinery will ever run a barrel of oil. At that time, I think there was probably a lot of shady things going on, but we were serious about building the refinery. There was a native fellow by the name of Wick, was one of the regional people, Alec Wick, and he was a local fisherman. He was a young fellow, but his parents had been fishermen. I mentioned a fellow from South Dakota had been a farmer, but he worked, he had the skills that we felt like you needed to learn. Yeah. As the years went by, the units were added. We just added to them, and I think now it's up probably, 250 now?
Something like that.
We're a little over 200. One cold winter with the refinery, we generated our own power at the very beginning. And we lost our natural gas. And so the refinery went down, and it was 20 below. And we were able to salvage it and get it back up. And that was Anita would tell you that she didn't see me for a week or so. One thing I was always proud of, and still proud of, there was never a fatality of a Tesoro employee. And never really any, all accidents are serious, but not anyone seriously disabled. I'm thinking about originally we sold heavy products to not only Japan, Standard Oil of California. They had tankers that ran between San Francisco and Hawaii and Alaska. And needless to say, coming from Hawaii, we'd always ask them to bring fruit, the pineapple, and we always look forward to that tanker coming in. We would send a truck to Anchorage to purchase. The ladies would make up a grocery list, and typically they would split a case of beans or peas or whatever. About once a month, we would go to Anchorage and pick up food for the families. Now, I can't imagine Marathon sending a truck to Anchorage to pick up groceries.
The refinery originally sold finished product by barge,
Yeah,
but also by truck from the refinery, right?
that's correct. Yeah.
And originally, where was the truck terminal for the finished product at the refinery?
And right out as you come into the refinery on the right, that loading dock now is primarily for asphalt, but that was product loading facility.
And when did they start selling product at the terminal across from Agrium?
Okay, that had to be in the 1980s. Union Oil had built that terminal, and we purchased it from them when Union Oil sold their facility. At that time, that was the way that Alaska received their fuel in through that facility. Union Oil at that time had many service stations in Alaska. There was Texaco, Chevron, and Union Oil that sold product to the public. Initially, it was primarily jet fuel and diesel fuel. Into the military, it was known as Jet A1, which is a glorified kerosene. The military, when the first products that we shipped out was to the military. And at that time, the military had a set aside for small refineries. And so that was one of the ways that we were able to move our product. There's been a lot of water under the bridge since then, yeah. Originally, when I went to work for Tesoro, they had a small refinery in Texas that ran about 10,000 barrels a day. They had a small refinery in Wyoming, Newcastle, Wyoming, that was about 20,000 barrels a day. Back to my original interview, I thought they was talking to me about the Wyoming refinery. And then the fellow said, well, we're talking about Alaska. And I said, whoa. Yeah. But I started out my career in Texas at a refinery that was built in 1929. And all the equipment was old. And I saw the opportunity to have a new refinery. And the people that run refineries, that's a dream, that you're able to, we had all new equipment. Yeah.
You can see that.
It was exciting. Chevron, I can't tell you the exact date. They closed their refinery. And the KPL, which was for receiving crude oil across the street. And that came up for sale, and we purchased it from Chevron, or Union Oil, yeah. And we shipped product later years across the Chevron dock. and we later purchased that facility. Yeah, at that time, that was before we purchased the KPL dock. We purchased property. In fact, Marathon may still own it. It was on the Kenai side of the fertilizer aggregate. That cleared area, we had looked at building a dock there. In fact, that's the last really good available water for a dock out north. It's deep enough that you could build a dock there. So if anyone ever wants to build a dock, that's a good facility to do it. We had an engineering company that designed a dock for that, but we never built it. The original refinery was built. The refinery and the terminal in Anchorage was built for $19 million. Yeah. Of course, at that time, that was a lot of money.
What do you think it would cost now?
Oh, I know what these other units cost, and I think Tesoro, of course, they had other facilities, but they sold it for like $23 billion. That was the whole, but that was more than Kenai. Another interesting story. The first time I got a paycheck, went to the bank, they had to check it out before they cashed it. And it was a real shock to me that, people didn't know that we was here to stay. Alaska State Bank, it's still there, it's Key Bank now.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, the borough mayor was George Navarre. And George was a lot of help with Tesoro getting started. Well, we would have public hearings, and people would, I guess I can tell this story. We was in Soldotna, and we told about, what we had planned to do. And we had people there objecting to it. And you can imagine a 33-year-old, I was shocked that anyone would object to it. And after the meeting, George Navarre came over to me and he said, "Mark, don't worry about that." He says, "Those people object to everything." But with his help, his encouragement, I guess, I was able to build the refinery. Now that Navarre's well known, I can remember he ran a grocery store out north, and I remember his wife's name was Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Here's these little kids running around the store. She's boxed one of them and telling them to behave themselves. Originally, where Paratus is at the restaurant now, that corner was a little grocery store, and it was run by the Navarres also. And Kenai had a drugstore across where it's where the burger bus is, that building right there. That was a small drugstore.
Now, every time there's a politician who comes through Kenai, they like to stop by at the refinery. Is that the way it was back in the?
Oh, yeah. After they finally determined that we was going to be there to stay,
So which politicians do you remember swinging by?
Well, I remember Senator Stevens and Don Young, and like I mentioned, the governors came by. After we finally were established, made sure that we was for real. I was fortunate to work for some very good people. As you can see with this, we built several units. All of the units were successful. We brought them in under what we said was going to build them for, and that's important. Recently, some of the light ends we had to burn off because there wasn't a market for it. Well, we couldn't burn in our fuel system for the refinery. We had to burn, just literally burn in a flare. It would be down where the pipeline is now.
Oh, okay.
Down as you come in, we had some flares set up, and we would burn the excess, what's known as propane, pentane, some of the lighter products that we couldn't blend into gasoline.
When did the LPG unit go in?
Went in 1975. It was the LPG and liquefied petroleum gas, and it was built in 75. Yeah, I think this is probably part of the hydrocracker unit that was built in the 80s. I'll tell you a story about, we built the hydrocracker unit in 1980. St. Helens blew in 1980, and we was trying to get equipment up to Alaska by rail. They had to divert it back around. I think it went through Montana maybe to make it into Seattle. So I can tell you when St. Helens erupted, yeah. The same year we built the hydrocracker unit.